Hello everybody, welcome to this Talking Tendons podcast. My name is Peter Maliaris. I'm an academic from Monash University. Today I'm going to be talking about conditioned pain modulation. So I did do one recently, and that was my student Pat Valence's paper, part of his PhD studies, where we were looking at conditioned pain modulation at the insertion of the Achilles, so insertional Achilles tendinopathy, and we did find a significant finding there. But what is conditioned pain modulation? Well, it's a way of testing whether there is adequate normal pain inhibitory responses to a painful stimulus. So let me explain that. What you generally would do in this paradigm is put someone's hand in some very cold water. So generally it's around about 8 or 9 degrees Celsius, and you keep it in there for quite a while, probably about 2 minutes, and they become very uncomfortable, and there's quite a bit of discomfort and pain, and to the point where they generally get 5 out of 10 in terms of their pain rating whilst in the water. And what you do is you measure mechanosensitivity, so how sensitive they are to pressure when they tell you that they're in pain. When you press on them really hard with an algometer, that test is called pressure pain threshold. They tell you this is painful. Generally, that point at which they perceive it's painful, it happens with more pressure after the painful stimulus. So that's conditioned pain modulation. So the pain is modulated by the painful stimulus. So it's sort of also described as pain treats pain, because you give a painful stimulus and they become less sensitive on that pressure pain threshold measure to pain for a short amount of time afterwards. Okay, so it's a way of testing this inhibitory mechanism, and I guess the inhibitory mechanism is a central mechanism because it's mediated by central inhibitory factors, pain inhibitory factors in the central nervous system. So that's sort of what you're testing with this. And the paper that I'm going to talk about today is from the crew in the University of Cape Town. So the lead author is, I'm probably not going to pronounce this properly, so I apologise in advance, but I will try. It's Translational Mkumbuzi, and other authors that you may have come across, Malcolm Collins and Alison September from that group, have done a lot of tendon research. So in effect, these guys looked at the literature, and it is a little bit hard to interpret when it comes to pain. We know pain is a bit of an enigma in tendinopathy. We think that it's probably related to peripheral sensitization and local nociceptive factors that could be driven by the cascade of cell-driven biochemicals that are sort of located within pathological tendons. We know that. But there's also some evidence that there could be changes in the central nervous system, including changes to inhibitory mechanisms like the CPM, but also there's other proxy measures of central sensitization. So, for example, you tend to get really mechanosensitive all around your body, for example, like in fibromyalgia. That's a real sign of central sensitization as well, when your threshold for triggering pain from pressure is reduced globally around the body. So these things can be used as measures, and they have been shown to be impacted for tendinopathy, especially in the upper limb. There's evidence for central sensitization based on these measures, but not so much in the lower limb, and not so much, it's fair to say, with measures like CPM. The other measure that hasn't been looked at very much is temporal summation, where you apply a painful stimulus over and over again, and you get this summation of that noxious response, painful response. So these paradigms have not been looked at as much, and this group wanted to clear up some of the data in the Achilles, where in the mid portion Achilles, Tompra a while ago showed that yes, there was a CPM effect that was that was showing there was reduced inhibitory response to this painful stimulus, but other studies like Plinsinger and other people have shown that maybe we don't see these differences. They haven't all looked at CPM, but they've looked at other proxy measures of central sensitization. So there's a bit of debate about whether there is central pain processing changes. So these guys looked at this CPM protocol within the Achilles mid portion, and they did a really fantastic study in terms of numbers. It's not an easy test, and they managed to look at 123 runners and also 100 controls, which is a really incredible amount of work. And they looked at this huge number of people and reported the data really nicely. You'll see some nice graphs. I'll link this paper, but I really like the graphs they've produced with individual data as well. And they look at PPT before the cold pressor and after, and they look at the CPM effects of the change in PPT. And they basically find that there wasn't a huge, there wasn't any significant differences between the controls and the people with Achilles tendinopathy in terms of their CPM response. That was pretty much this, the main finding, that there wasn't a difference in their CPM response, and that was their primary aim. So they addressed the primary aim. They looked at that. I guess one of the things to mention is that the CPM was taken, or the pressure pain thresholds were taken at the painful Achilles, and Pat Valens has talked about this, my PhD in his paper, that might interact with the local nociceptive mechanism. So it also might interact with their anticipation of pain, and that might muddy the waters a bit, because it is a psychophysical test. It's also about the apprehension and also their anticipation. But also the local pain mechanisms that are occurring there. So if you look at CPM at other sites, it gives you a clearer picture, I guess, of more the processing without that interacting effect of the local pain mechanisms. All right, so let's talk then about the actual CPM response. The CPM response was quite variable, and you can see in figure 1, the third figure, figure C, as part of that panel of figures, there's quite a big variability. Some people actually got to stand more pressure, which is the normal response after cold water immersion. Some people stood less pressure, but overall there was no real differences or change, no overall CPM effect in either group, which is interesting in itself. I think the variability is interesting to try and explain, because some of our patients who get worse after something like this, they probably have some impairments in their inhibitory mechanisms that may be relevant and may also influence their outcomes. So thinking about this in a different way and understanding some of the heterogeneity, I think, is important. Another important point with this study is that they did have only recreational runners, which is good because it's homogeneous, but it's also, they were quite low in their severity, and that might have influenced the ability to look at between group differences. I know in Pat's study he basically had people who were quite mixed. A lot of them didn't have weren't active in sport at all, so that could be a different demographic and possibly a bit older. The other thing was that they were younger. The controls in this group were younger, and they were less likely to be runners than the people with Achilles. So if you look at table 1, you can see all that data. So that also could introduce some issues, but I think they controlled for that statistically, and they still found that even with that. And BMI was different as well. But even controlling for those, there was no differences still in that CPM effect. And you can see the variability is huge, as I highlighted in that figure C. So interesting, really interesting, another CPM study, which is great. We're getting more CPM studies. There's also one by Miles Murphy, which is worth looking at. There's 6 people. I believe it's just an Achilles population. Yeah, mid-portion Achilles. And they did a really good recruitment process where they tried to really take out a lot of the confounders, and they found quite a healthy, normal CPM response. So again, it just highlights how different populations can be different, and the way people do things will influence the outcomes. So it's worth considering when you're reading these studies. But I think where it leaves us is that we're not sure really still about CPM and pain processing centrally, whether that's impacted. Probably is for some people, probably isn't for others, depending on the population. So worth looking at, as I say, in a little bit more detail how this could play out for some of our population groups, and what explains some of the heterogeneity, which I think is really the most interesting finding from this study that I've just talked about. Excellent. So I'll leave it there for today. Thank you for listening. I will link this to the show notes for this podcast. So thanks again. I'll see you next time.